It's been a big day already, and we're halfway there. But I'm just very honored to be the moderator of the Family Perspectives Roundtable. So my name is Amber Dean. I teach with Chandrima in the Department of English and Cultural Studies at McMaster. And Chandrima's vision for this session really was to invite a few family members to start us off with some thoughts in response to questions that we've sent them in advance. And then we will open up so that we can hear as many perspectives and thoughts as possible in the hour or so that we have for this session. And then, of course, the conversation can continue into the wonderful lunch that will be waiting for us out in the hall. After we conclude. So I'm going to introduce our three panelists here and then start with some questions and then the conversation will unfold. So from the far left, we have Anita Dhanjal, and Anita lives with her husband in Richmond Hill right now, and they have 3 children. And she also wanted me to acknowledge her and her brother, Rajiv, who's right next to her, their father, Mr. Kalsi, for all of his role and support. And Rajiv comes to us today from Ottawa, although he grew up in Georgetown, Ontario, and now lives in Ottawa, where he works at the Ottawa Hospital Rehabilitation Center. And he credits his sister, who he lost on Flight 182, with his movement into healthcare and to providing assistive devices to people with physical disabilities. Rob sent me his bio, and I have it on my phone, sorry. But Rob, directly to my left here, grew up here in the Hamilton area, Rob Alexander, and completed his high school and his post-secondary here. He's a alumnus of McMaster, so we've had a chance to talk over this weekend about how meaningful it is for him that McMaster is taking the initiative to host this conference. And Rob has been married almost 18 years to Linda and has a 10-year-old daughter, Xenia, and 7-year-old son, Quentin, who have both been a little sick, keeping them up. They've been under the weather. So Anita, Rajiv, and Rob, and then after the formal questions that I have for them, Dr. Anant Anantaraman, who's right here in the front, who also lost his family in the bombing, has a desire to also address us for a few minutes. He founded the Bhawani Memorial School in 1999 in India in memory of his family, and he's going to speak to us a little bit to start off the discussion portion of the event. Yeah. So I'm just going to begin by asking, and I should also say that not all 3 panelists are going to address all of the different questions, but the first question is just to invite each of the 3 of you, Rob, Rajiv, and Anita, to tell us a little bit about your relationship to the Air India bombing. Tell us a little bit more about that. And maybe we'll start with Anita, if that's okay, and move our way back this way.
Hi, my sister, Anita Kalsi, was on Air India Flight 182. And my parents and brother had gone to India just weeks before. Before my father and mother left for India, they visited me as I was 8.5 months pregnant with their first grandchild. Somewhere in my mind, I knew something was going to happen. I was very upset that they were leaving, left India without waiting for the birth of my son. I had no idea that this horrific tragedy would take my sister away and the precious lives that were traveling with her on that plane. We are all victims of traumatization in this horrific tragedy. Thank you.
Like Anita said, Indra was our sister, and she was 21, I was 19. And I remember, because my parents were in India as well as my brother, and she couldn't leave. Like, she ended up on that flight just because of the scheduling with her schooling and work. So I remember dropping her off at the airport, and that's the last time I saw her. So that's my connection.
Thanks. Yeah, Anita, maybe if we want to pull that microphone a little closer.
Sorry. There you go. So just.
Dr. Matthew Alexander ended up on the plane by a bit of a default booking. He was booked to go to see his ailing mother in the Kerala part of India. And he was actually booked on an Air France flight that my mom had booked for him. And there was a chap that, through the Hamilton community, Indian community, he knew that worked at Air India, and he kept kind of bugging him to take a booking through Air India, and that's how he ended up on the plane. I remember that day like it was yesterday when he came home and told my mom that she has to cancel the Air France ticket. And I remember the argument that ensued. But I was also supposed to go with him, but he said it was right at the end of school, and he said, go to your basketball camp and I'll be back in 10 days. And then the tragedy kind of unfolded after that. In terms of involvement now in relationship with Air India, I do a little bit of volunteering with the Air India Victims Family Association and work with Dr. Gupta and Sushil, and have had the opportunity to volunteer some time with the Kanishka project that the Canadian government put forth as a result of the inquiry as well. So we're trying to keep Air India at the forefront of Canadian history and memory, but at the same time, as a lot of the family members want to stress, is we don't want this to happen again. So that's my involvement at this time.
We've been hearing a lot yesterday and today about the inadequacy of the government's response after the bombing, but of course no one knows about that inadequacy quite as well as those of you who lived through it and experienced it firsthand. So we also wanted to invite the three of you just to reflect on your thoughts on the government's response to the tragedy.
The tragedy was the largest mass murder in Canadian history. Investigation 20 years and still ongoing. It was the most expensive trial in Canadian history, approximately $130 million. The responses of the Canadian government were far from what they should have been done on the day of this horrific tragedy. Cascading series of errors by the Government of Canada, RCMP, Canadian Security Intelligence Service, that allowed the terrorist attacks to take place. The general handling of the catastrophe was so wrong, as the loss radiated through our community without any support. All evidence has fallen markedly short of that standard. Previous warnings, destroyed evidence, tapes, murdered witnesses, CSIS connection, a report that remains secret to this day. The government continues to insist that there was no espionage involved. I criticize the government for dismissing the catastrophe as an Indian incident when over 90% of the passengers were Canadian citizens. When the plane exploded, so did our Canadian identity.
I'll just add, I guess people that had traveled to Ireland after the crash felt that the Canadian officials didn't really know how to respond. At that time, it was the Irish that, especially my father, he went to Ireland. And they were so warm. And I think maybe it's a history of violence in that country as well. But I think it took public opinion and public pressure to bring about the inquiry and then the trial. But again, yeah, the government I don't think they knew how to react when it happened. They didn't consider it as a Canadian tragedy.
I would same sentiments that Anita and Rajiv have said. There wasn't a response from the Canadian government at the time of the tragedy, and I get the fact that it was an unprecedented event in Canada and even around the world. So maybe the government did not know how to react, but the fact that the majority of the people on the flight were Canadian taxpayers, the government should have known better and reacted better at that time. Now, pardon me, now with after the trial and the inquiry, the government response has been better. But we still call on the government for proper responses to the recommendations from the inquiry. Some of them have been implemented in terms of public safety protocols and things like that, but more has to be done. We can't be complacent. We see what's going on around in the world, even in Canada. So we can't be complacent. So the government has to continue to respond appropriately, especially with the way things are going on and developing in different parts of the world. But in terms of the inquiry, we hope that those recommendations are taken seriously, and it's been some years since those recommendations have been put forth, and sometimes we feel that those recommendations are being put on the back burner, so we hope that that doesn't happen.
Thank you. We're going to shift a little bit now and think about, or ask you to reflect on some of the things that you've found meaningful or that have offered sources of strength in the aftermath of the bombing, I guess. So was wondering if you just wanted to talk a little bit. I think Rob and Rajiv are planning to tell us a little bit about how you've found and built support systems with other families and with people who were affected by the tragedy.
I guess as a younger person at the time of the tragedy, I didn't feel very connected to other families. It was more our parents, I think, that got together with other victims' families, but through association, I did meet some of them. I had gone to Ireland in 1986 and for the 1-year anniversary, and met some of the people there, and some of those people I've continued to keep in touch with, and that's been supportive. But really, none of the siblings that of other families that I get to know, and maybe it's because we were in Georgetown, we were sort of away from Toronto and where some of the bigger groups were. But yeah, that was probably my extent of involvement with the other victims' families.
For us, we did have a pretty close-knit family, and again, we grew up in Hamilton here. I still remember getting calls from Dr. Gupta updating us about different get-togethers and things like that. So that was a nice effort on his part, because there wasn't any support at the government level. We didn't know who really to turn to. Even when the crash happened, we didn't know what was going on in terms of were there survivors or not. We had to wait days for even to get that information. But in terms of family support, we kept pretty close, and we were pretty involved in our community with our school, and in the Hamilton area, a lot of the Indian community supported us after the tragedy happened. But mainly, it was this close nucleus of our family and close friends that helped us get through it, and even to this day, some of my classmates still call my mom on June 23rd. It's nice. So those type of things, it's a thing that the community has to learn. If anything were like this to happen again, that sort of support has to be there for the victims, and that's something that we hope that the government's learned over the almost 31 years that's gone past.
Yeah. And as much as that, like professional support can be so helpful and so needed, we also heard a little bit yesterday about some of the ways that can be limited too, right? And some of the ways that building connections, both with others who have shared that experience of loss, but also with others who are kind of willing to reach out in a gesture of support, like your friends who remember to call your mom every year on the anniversary. Or I like to think about that as kind of engaging in a kind of being a critical witness, right? Recognizing that there are others who have this kind of proximity to the loss, and what might they actually need or want in order to have that proximity acknowledged, I guess. So it's a lovely thing to hear you say that they just remember to make that phone call every year. Yeah. Thank you. So also, Rob and Rajiv, going to invite you to talk a little bit about how the trials and the public inquiry affected you. Rob, you've already said that the inquiry in particular seemed to prompt a bit of a shift in the government's response, but if you want to tell us a little bit about the impact of the trial and the inquiry on you or on your families, that would be great.
I didn't go to the trial. My father did, and my mother in Vancouver. And they were disappointed at the end of it that after all the expense and there were no convictions. And then when the inquiry happened, since I lived in Ottawa, I attended a few of the sessions. And it was really, I guess, startling to see how leading up to the disaster that it could have been stopped in so many ways and at so many points, and it wasn't. And yeah, I still don't really know what to make of that and how it ended up happening the way it did. And I guess the government didn't seem to. Well, the big issue was that the RCMP and CSIS weren't talking to each other, so they didn't know what was going on between them. And we see how disastrous that was. So, like Rob, I do hope that the recommendations are implemented fully.
The trial was an interesting experience. I hadn't been in a courtroom a lot in that till that point in my life, but to see the accused come in and what kind of setup they had there, and a lot of the family members here that attended would remember the unique setup of that courtroom. To see the two accused come in with a bit of a belligerent attitude was a little bit disturbing. So we hoped for a different result, obviously, and the outcome was not what we wanted or hoped for. So we know that the criminal investigation continues to this day. To what extent, I'm not exactly sure. Obviously, it's a private matter that the RCMP and CSIS take care of. But we hope that there is some form of justice. It's been a long time, a lifetime for many people, that some people won't see justice for this. So it's that in itself is too bad. But we hope that that continues to be a priority for the agencies that look at this matter. The public inquiry, we were, as families, I think we were generally pleased by the outcome of it, the fact that there was recognition on the government's part that this was something that was important enough that had to be looked at, and the scope of the public inquiry that happened, the recommendations. Again, we feel it's a very important piece of Canadian history now that's taken place, and something that shouldn't be ignored or put on the back burner. There's very good recommendations in the inquiry. We were able to take part in it, and a lot of us as family members gave our victim impact statement, if you want to call it that, which is a nerve-wracking thing in itself, and some people weren't able to attend personally, so they gave a statement, which my mom did. I was able to go and give a personal statement at the inquiry, which it was part of my healing process. And to be able to go on a regular basis, because my in-laws live in Ottawa, so I was able to attend the inquiry a fair bit. But it was, I'm glad that they did it. Now it's just keeping up with the recommendations and making sure that that's not forgotten, some of those things. So it was a long time coming. It did take a lot of effort on a lot of the family members that cried for the public inquiry, and the jostling back and forth of the government of the day and the family members. A lot of things were confirmed that this family suspected over the years, and that effort, I think, was worth it to go through, no matter how long it was, but we're glad that it did get completed.
Yeah. That question of what justice looks like after a tragedy like this is such a big one and a difficult one, right? Like, because on the one hand, it is so important that individual perpetrators who commit acts of violence are held accountable in some way for those acts. And yet, we've also heard over the last couple of days about how many other factors were implicated in what happened, and how ongoing racism in Canada was both a factor in what happened and a factor in the failures that happened in the aftermath of the event. And so I just often think about, how difficult sometimes those trials, and especially, Rajiv, you mentioned the costliness of the trials, right? And how much money kind of goes into that particular pursuit of justice. And it's just a complicated question about what justice might look like. And that is partly what leads us to the next question that Rob and Rajiv are also going to take up for us, about how the tragedy has played a role in Canadian national identity, if at all, in your sense of things, and whether that matters to the question of justice. I'm ad-libbing here. That wasn't in your original question, but I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts of whether you think, part of a just response to the bombing has to do with how its memory is taken up or not in a national context, or in relationship to national identity.
That's it's an interesting question I was thinking about, and I had a quick discussion with Padma Viswanathan just earlier, and so it got me thinking again. But so I was talking to a colleague of mine on the plane yesterday as I was flying back from a workplace, and he's Caucasian, and he was saying, in a way, I asked him that question: what do you think of this tragedy? And he knew of it, but he said, in a way, we all, I don't know if we're a bit selfish in a way, but in a sense that we all have our own personal connections to different tragedies that have gone on for millennia. Like, people from the Jewish background would remember the Holocaust in a way that maybe in Canada, we remember this event, but it's a different scale, but still it's an important for the individual. And although I guess the previous government had maybe used the event of the Air India bombing to reinforce the need to enact some anti-terrorism laws that maybe have gone too far. So in the Canadian context, they've used that as a means to push their own agenda. On a scale of like the general public, I don't think it's in our collective consciousness, the Air India tragedy. But I think it kind of relates to maybe, being able to relate to the ethnic background of the person. Maybe that makes any sense.
I would agree with you in terms of the Canadian bank of knowledge about it. Conferences like this are very unique, and I applaud Chandrima and Amber and your teams at McMaster, and I'm proud that McMaster's doing it, to be able to bring it to the forefront for history and grief and memory, because hasn't been done in a context nationally or even internationally for this particular Air India tragedy. It hasn't been in my life. I've come across a lot of people, being young or old, and the younger ones don't know about it, and it's still to this day the largest Canadian act of terrorism, and people don't know about it. Everyone talks about 9/11, and that was a tragic thing too, of course, but for our Canadian family, it's not at the forefront. So it's nice to see conferences like this come about, and I'm really proud that McMaster's done that. It would be nice to see it more of a priority, either in curriculum, either at the university level or secondary education level. I don't know what to do with that or how that would be addressed. Maybe we have to go to our ministries to demand that it be that way, and include it in the Canadian consciousness, as Rajiv brought out, because that's an important thing, because we were all the majority were Canadians that were on the plane. The fact that it was an Air India plane is an immaterial thing to me. It happened on an Air India plane, but It is a big Canadian tragedy that a lot of people don't know about. In my own personal experience I was in high school when it happened, and that high school community, because they knew my father was on the plane, they were able to support my family emotionally and mentally. So and they still kind of do that, but that's because they were exposed to it directly. So for the majority of Canadians and other different organizations, they don't know about it and they don't remember it, unfortunately. So I think that has to change somehow, and we leave it to you educators and researchers to continue that work.
I said yesterday at the opening that I had to talk to my 8-year-old about where I was going to be, right? And I was going to be here and explain why. And it dawned on me that I didn't think that there's any likelihood that he would learn anything about this event in school. And then I think if he did, what would he be learning as well, right? I think that concern has been raised in response to the ways that curriculum is now in some ways trying to address the traumas of settler colonialism and Indigenous genocide in Canada in the curriculum, but it's not always a super successful, I guess, integration, because sometimes when a trauma like that receives a formal apology or acknowledgement from government, right, as Indian residential school survivors have and as Air India victim families have, sometimes that apology can function to situate that event only in the past and that loss in the past, right? As though the apology becomes a way to say, okay, the nation has apologized and reconciled, and now we'll move on. And there can be some limitations, I think, to that too. But Chandrima and I know that when we teach this material in our undergraduate classes at McMaster, a large number of students haven't ever even heard of the event. And that's always a bit of a shocking reminder of the ways that it doesn't get remembered and taken up and taught. And yeah, so good challenge to us, Rob, as educators, to think about what would it mean to integrate it more into curriculum and course syllabi and things like that. Yeah. One last question for the 3 panelists, and then we'll turn to Dr. Raman, and then we'll open things up. And that question is just quite simply to invite you to reflect on other ways you've found to address your grief. We know, we've heard, Rob, a little bit that you've gotten involved with the Air India Victims Families Association. Rajiv, you created a radio documentary that I'd love to invite you to say a little bit more about. And Anita, you're willing to answer this one for us as well. So please, why don't you begin?
Okay, thank you. Ways to address my grief through these last 31 years. My memories of my sister keep her spirit alive, as she was only 21 years old. She was finding her way in life and wanted to be a nurse as she was finishing her education. I remember my sister, as she stayed back to be there when my son was born, she sent gifts that she brought from the drugstore that she worked in Mississauga. And she sent them by special courier for him. I have kept these gifts with me and will give them to my son when he has his first child. She left a name for my son, and even though we chose a different one, I remember after the crash I went to the town hall and I asked them if the birth certificate was processed. I said, no, it's not. So I quickly got the form, changed the name to Kishan. I didn't tell my husband or my family, but I'm so happy that I'm carrying this name for her, the one that she wanted. I know that she would be proud of him and all her nieces and nephews. My brother Rajiv, he planted a tree behind our house in Georgetown in the park where we all grew up. We visit to pay our respects to her, a tree that will grow forever, like our sister, forever in our hearts. I remember her on her birthdays, special holidays, and we all remember her. Visiting the memorial sites and talking to the families that have lost loved ones gives us comfort. Coming here has given us support in our grief. Thank you so much for doing this for all of us. These things bring a measure of closure to our family who still grieve for her loss. These are strong emotions: sadness, anger, guilt, despair, relief, love, or maybe hope.
for the 20th anniversary in 2005, almost all of our family, like my parents and my siblings, were going to Ireland. And so I had been listening to this radio program on CBC called Out Front, and they would do personal documentaries, people that could do them. So I thought that'd be kind of interesting to take along something to record the event. And so they gave me a little recorder at that time, and so I went, and I just wanted to know from my parents why they came, because they were coming every year since 1986 to the memorial site. And I think both of them found they got solace from going to Ireland, especially the people they met. They were so welcoming, and they looked forward to seeing them every year. There's still, I think to this day, there are some people that go every year as well that have been going since then. So they found that in a way it helped their healing, and it was because her body wasn't found. It was sort of, I always felt it was the only tangible thing to her death that you could kind of see, right? So, so we went as well, and I interviewed them, and they said that it was almost like a healing to go there. So it was, so it's a place that I would like to go back to, but in a way, I think it just means different things to everybody. Like I don't know if I feel the connection there, but it's still a very peaceful place, and it's really, the people there, you couldn't say, they're so supportive. And then I guess the other ways I've been inspired by people like Dr. Anantaraman, who's been able to, with that grief, go back to India and open a school. And I think that's just some of the really good things that have come out of this.
Everyone deals with grief in different ways, and most of us here have different religious beliefs and hopes for the future, and my family has the same thing. And I think the biggest way was keeping very close-knit as a family. All my siblings went to Mac as well, and we stayed close to home and supported my mom. Even to this day, we're still very close geographically, so that helps. That was one of the main ways we did. Keeping close with some of the families that were also involved in the tragedy helped. Even just keeping informed. And Dr. Gupta always did such a fabulous job with that, and he continues to do that. So I personally thank you for that. And going forward, we've personally, being involved with the community, trying to work hard, and we try to spend a lot of time with our kids. And the odd time that comes up, where's Granddad, or Apachan they call, in our culture. So that sometimes is a difficult conversation to have, but it has to be had with our children. We're proud of my father, but unfortunately he's not here. So we try to remember him as best as we can, the best way we can. And so doing what we can for our family, we try to keep close together, and that helps with the grief. It comes up at funny times. Even I remember just anecdotally, we were driving, and he was probably 6 or something like that, 5 or 6, and he asked a question because he saw an airplane in the air. Was it that type of airplane? And the conversation that ensued was a little bit interesting. So different things come up, as all the family members know. So we continue to deal with that, and we hope that someday we'll hopefully see some justice. But we've after 31 years, we've learned to cope with different things. But as a matter of daily life, it always is with you.
It's really a remarkable gift that the three of you have given us by sharing a bit about your experiences and your reflections 30 years on now about this enormous loss. So I'm very grateful to each of you for sharing that with us, giving us that gift. Thank you. And Dr. Raman arrived today and felt that he also wanted to share with us a bit about his family and the school that he's built in India in their memory. And so I just want to turn over to you now. Do you want to sit up here or do you want to? Yeah, there, perfect. That will work.
I don't want to put it. Just
Put it closer.
when I came to know about this conference, when I first came to know about the conference, my immediate reaction was, what is this? Do I have to go through this history and subsequent grief? I decided, after some dispassionate thinking, that maybe we have to learn from history, and maybe I have a role to play. And what my own experience will probably teach something to the people in the conference. Anyway, I lost my 2 girls and my wife in the tragedy. And the girls were exceptionally talented violinists, and they were pretty much in the NAC and National Arts Center Orchestra. So the tragedy resulted not only in my own life being devastated, also I lost my music, I lost everything in life. My soul was gone. So what is it that I do? Just commit suicide and end my life, or do something about it? My spirituality, and also going back to the Vedic philosophy, Indian philosophy, Hindu philosophy, whatever you want to call it, helped me to sustain my life. 5 years of totally devastated life, totally disoriented, do not know what I am doing, where I am going, why I am living, that kind of life. After 5 years, my friends in Ottawa and at work helped me to do certain things that helped to take a new path in life. If you want to achieve something in the world, you have to start from the roots. So I thought maybe we should start a school and teach the children good things in life. Also, music was so close to my heart that I decided to give a lot of scholarships, number of scholarships in the Ottawa area. So we have several scholarships, music scholarships, particularly in the strings, violin and cello. So we started a lot of scholarships in the Ottawa area. I have 3 or 4 scholarships in the university. I was in the university, by the way, and also in the Kiwanis Music Festival, the Ottawa Youth Orchestra, and all the kinds. And I'm proud to say at the moment that several people who won the scholarships are playing internationally. Some of them are already in the NAC and Montreal Symphony or Ottawa Symphony and so on. Winnipeg, British Columbia, Vancouver Symphony and so on. So it's nice to see talent being developed, development of talent, particularly in the musical area. And these scholarships have been in place for the last 15 years, and we would like to maintain it, and probably, if everything goes well, increase the number of scholarships. Because I believe personally that music is or should be part of one's life. I started a school in 1999, in Yerkad, which is a hill station in South India. And this is a school. And I started with the little ones, 4-year-olds, because I think if you want to do something worthwhile that will sustain itself, we have to start from the beginning. We have to have a clean board. We do not want a board where there is a lot of things written. So I decided that start with a clean board, a clean mind, an innocent mind. So we started with kids, 4-year-olds. And so this school has been in existence for the last 15 years, 16 years. And maybe 1,000 people, 1,000 kids have graduated from the school. And the school is not like any other school. It is quite different. If you know something about the educational system in India, you will know what I am talking about. We treat the kids as not as commodities, but as people. Give them a lot of respect and treat them with a great deal of love and affection. And our teaching is very much modern in the sense we teach them project-oriented learning and also learning traditional standard things like chemistry, physics, mathematics, and so on. I teach them a lot of mathematics and physics and chemistry and all that myself. And it's a joy. So after the early devastated life, I have learned to live. I have learned to accept that, yes, it was God's mandate that I should change my path in life. If it had been otherwise, I would have been in the rat race myself. So I needed that shock in order to have a larger family. Now I have a very big family and taking care of them. And the kids do come to me, call me uncle, and then, "Uncle, today I have not had breakfast." It's a joy. So my life is made. So if I am not there, they feel bad. So there has been something, something has happened. So I think I'm able to change their life. And the only place where they can get that kind of love is at this school, because these kids come from small communities where the parents, particularly the father, do not even care for the child and no love at all. So these are all little communities in villages. And so my life is pretty much associated with the school and the programs in Ottawa. We have a foundation, and it's called Bhawani Anantaraman Foundation in Ottawa, and registered in Canada, and also the school. We would like to expand the school so that it will touch other communities in India and provide a solid education, a modern education. And as I mentioned, the school is free. There is no charge. The only thing that they have to do is to perform. We expect performance. We don't want them to go and sit in the warm seat, warming up the seat. That's not what the purpose was. And also we give free lunch, free snacks, and everything is free. There is no money involved at all. And the only criterion is that they should perform. In other words, we also give things like homework and assignments and this and that and so on, all those things they have to do. And if they don't do, we say, okay, call the parents and tell them, well, we have to do something about it and give somebody else a chance if you cannot do that thing. So there is a lot of frustration in all this, but at the same time, I think I am determined to move forward and not backwards. So everything comes with everything is a challenge, but at the same time, life itself is a challenge. So I'm no longer vindictive. I don't get involved, when all the inquiry and other things were all going on. I totally dissociated myself from all that. I didn't want to participate in any of those things because what was the point? They are all gone. I have lost my soul. What's the purpose? There is nothing. I'm not into that mood at all, pointing fingers at this and that and so on. No, it doesn't help. It's all gone. It's finished. So my chapter is closed. So there is another bite. So that is the way I looked at it, and that's the way I have been moving along. Now I am totally detached. I don't want to have politically associate, those kind of issues. They don't affect me anymore. But at the same time, the fact that the school is there keeps me very busy. And the future is that what I would like to do is to sort of start more schools and be able to sort of spread into other communities and be able to start other schools along the same lines, giving free education, because in India, education is very commercial. Good education costs a lot. And ordinary small middle-class families may not be able to even support the education of the children. But I think if we can do those kind of things and also support the programs in Ottawa, like music scholarships and so on, I think this is my life. And I think that's the way I'm going now. And I would like you to sort of, any of you who want to come to and visit the school, please do. You're all welcome, because after all, as I said, there is nothing that is mine. It belongs to the community. It belongs to the people. It's their school. And I think I want you to share the joy of seeing the wonderful children. And I want you to come to the music program in Ottawa. It'll generally happen, normally it used to happen in April, May, during which time I'm here always. And now this year, I think it's going to happen probably in November. So the music, as I said, the way the kids play is exceptional, professional quality. Wonderful music. It's generally chamber music, and the quality of performance is superb. So if you can come to the concert, enjoy the concert, and make the players happy. They would like to see more people. They would like to see more faces, people enjoying their concert, their own performance. And as regards to school, they would love to see you. And the happiness in their face will make your life. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. No, please stay, Dr. Raman, and thank you so much. You started your remarks by saying, the call to come to the conference was a difficult one because to revisit everything, when we ask people who've experienced trauma to, yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. We ask you then to bring the trauma
As I said,
back.
thinking about it, I thought, no, I have a role to play. I have to. And I think the role is that we have to learn from history. If we don't learn from history, it's a wasted thing. I always used to say, tell the children, okay, Mahatma Gandhi, his picture is there in all the currency. That's not the way he should be remembered. Do what he told you.
Mm-hmm.
Action. It's not, don't build statues and this and that and so on. That's not where it is. You want to do something, do it. An example is better than a precept.
It's that be the change. Be the change, right?
In other words,
No.
don't talk about it, just do it.
Yeah.
And building statues, including conferences, of course, but do it. Change the world by action, not by talking. And that's the way the school is.
So, thank you.
Quite often in India, people say, okay, be truthful, be honest. I teach the kids, never say anything untruthful. Always be truthful. Say, in order to be truthful, you need courage. So, be truthful, be honest. Maintain your integrity. I think this is what my advice is for the kids. And also, we are very much Gandhian. In other words, teach the Gandhian values in life.
Dr. Raman, if people are interested in knowing more about the school and supporting your foundation, maybe they could talk to you at lunchtime, and maybe we could put some information. I'm looking for Chandrima, but she's not there. But I imagine we could put some information on the conference website so that people can connect with the foundation that way as well. We've asked a lot, is what I was going to say, of all four of you. And when we ask you to reflect on that trauma, the trauma becomes part of the present again, right? So I just want to acknowledge that we've asked a lot. We've received a gift. We have a bit of time before lunch. If people have questions or want to offer other reflections, I would now like to just turn it over and see if anyone would like to speak.